President Trump confirms that he's authorized covert CIA operations in Venezuela and says he's also considering U.S. land strikes there. The announcement marks a major step in the administration's fight against drug cartels and puts greater pressure on Venezuela's leader, Nicolas Maduro. Here's the latest.
The Department of Justice.
Speaking from the Oval Office yesterday, President Trump said he'd approve covert CIA actions inside Venezuela. The move expands U.S. intelligence and military operations against what Trump calls a narco state run by President Nicolas Maduro.
I authorize for two reasons, really. Number one, they have emptied their prisons into the United States of America. And the other thing are drugs. We have a lot of drugs coming in from Venezuela. And a lot of the Venezuelan drugs come in through the sea, so you get to see that. But we're going to stop them by land also.
Trump says the CIA mission works alongside U.S. military strikes already underway. Since early September, U.S. forces have carried out at least 5 attacks on boats the administration says were involved in drug trafficking. Trump says those strikes have almost totally stopped drug smuggling by sea. And now his administration is looking at possible land operations targeting Venezuelan cartels. Venezuelan officials are calling the CIA authorization a violation of international law and accuse Washington of trying to destabilize the country. When asked Wednesday if the CIA was authorized to remove Maduro from power, Trump dismissed the question.
Oh, I don't want to answer a question like that. That's a ridiculous question for me to be given. Not really a ridiculous question, but wouldn't it be a ridiculous question for me to answer?
In Washington, members of Congress from both parties say the president's actions are effectively an act of war without seeking authorization from Congress. Senator Jeanne Shaheen, the ranking Democrat on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, said the administration's covert operations slide the U.S. closer to outright conflict with no transparency or guardrails. Meanwhile, the U.S. Coast Guard says it seized about 100,000 pounds of cocaine since August as part of a massive crackdown on drug smuggling in the Eastern Pacific. The Coast Guard says the operation, called Pacific Viper, has already stopped 34 boats and led to 86 arrests of suspected traffickers from Central and South America. Rear Admiral Jeffrey Novak called the results remarkable, saying Coast Guard crews are dismantling narco-terror networks and scouring smuggling routes in the Pacific. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem says Pacific Viper is a crucial weapon in the fight against foreign drug cartels and proof the U.S. is reestablishing maritime dominance.
Earlier, White House Press Secretary Leavitt also answered questions from reporters about the strikes on boats carrying drugs from cartels in waters outside the U.S.
The president's been very clear, and he's been very transparent about these strikes, releasing classified video, unclassifying that video, declassifying it rather for all of you to see, and to let the public and lawmakers know with each of these strikes. And there should be no surprise for this. The president campaigned on using every lever of power to go after the drug cartels who have been trafficking illicit poison into our country for far too long.
Leavitt said the strikes are proving successful as less boats are arriving to the U.S. shores carrying drugs, and that these strikes will continue. President Trump authorized the CIA to conduct covert operations inside Venezuela. Joining us to discuss is Gerard Filitti, senior counsel at the Lawfare Project and attorney specializing in counterterrorism and international law. So good afternoon, Gerard. So what does it involve here for the CIA to conduct these operations inside Venezuela?
Well, what this involved is a presidential finding that there is a danger, a threat to the national security of the United States that's served by the CIA conducting operations, covert operations within Venezuela. This is something that is within the president's authority under Article 2 of our Constitution. Has been done by many presidents in the past, whether dealing with narco traffickers or intelligence issues. So this is now the assets of the CIA are being set to use upon narco trafficking and the drug trade in Venezuela.
How does this intersect with international law?
Well, international law is a little bit of a gray area when it comes to espionage. It's something that everyone does, but is not explicitly covered by permission from international bodies. It's something that is understood to be within the purview of the United States or any country when acting in legitimate self-defense. And this is the issue. President Trump has identified narco trafficking, has identified these drug cartels as a clear and present danger to the United States, a national security threat, given the devastating impact that they've had. So this gives the United States the ability to use its assets, military and intelligence, to defend itself, which is acceptable under international law.
And Gerard, I would also like to know if things such as this is rare or not. Is this new, or are there historical precedents for the CIA conducting these operations in Venezuela?
There are historical precedents for using the CIA for narco trafficking. It's played a role in the CIA has developed more and more counter narcotics assets and abilities over the years, starting from South America in the 1990s, going into Panama as well, Central America, and overseas in Africa as well. Drug trafficking has also been linked to terrorism, to Hezbollah, Hamas, and Iran-backed factions. So the CIA has gradually developed its expertise in narco trafficking over time. So now is the time to employ it, according to President Trump, in Venezuela.
Do you think it could have any impact on international relations, particularly in the region?
Well, international relations with Venezuela were not good to begin with under President Maduro, who is operating as a dictator there. So that is not likely to change, not likely to be any better for this. But this is also, narco trafficking is an issue that affects other neighboring countries as well. And they're just as happy for the Trump administration and their allies to deal with these issues so that they don't have domestic problems in other Latin American and South American countries from narco trafficking, from drug cartels. So this is not something that's likely to dampen relations with anyone other than Venezuela, but is actually a good thing for the region.
So you're saying relations with Venezuela wasn't good in the first place, but I don't know, is this a little bit different? Because in your mind, is there a risk for escalation between the U.S. And Venezuela in terms of, possible conflict?
Well, there's always the risk for escalation, and that is the concern. Nicolas Maduro, the leader of Venezuela, is not seen as legitimate by the United States and by many governments. He has refused to seat popularly elected parliamentarians in the last election, so he's essentially operating as a dictator, which makes him very much a pariah among Western nations. Among the few allies that he has are Russia and Communist China. So this is a situation where American intervention, if it's not explicit as a military action against Venezuela, helps to shape the people in the country who are already opposed to Maduro and might lead to a beneficial outcome.
Also, Gerard, do you have any guesses as to perhaps how might Venezuela's regime and its allies respond in light of this?
Well, I think we will hear a lot of outrage. We will hear emotions being put before the United Nations and other international bodies, but I don't expect to see any military action unless, of course, the United States takes military action within the boundaries of Venezuela. Right now, interdictions have taken place in international waters, and there's very little that Venezuela can do to that effect other than purposely attack American interests, which would be the type of escalation that no one really wants. So right now, I don't see Venezuela doing anything more than showing diplomatic outrage, but they will probably exercise their right to defend themselves if they see an incursion by American military.
So you brought up international bodies. I'm wondering, will the UN intervene, likely or unlikely?
It's not likely that the UN will intervene. The United States sits on the Security Council, so we'll have a veto over anything that is put before it. So we will basically hear a lot of rhetoric. We will hear a lot of angry language. But between the United States and its allies, I think that the UK, France, Germany will all align that Maduro is an illegitimate leader and that whatever Venezuela puts forth will not have carrying much weight.
So Gerard, with the time left here, I want to ask you about another topic. A federal judge, temporarily blocked President Trump's plan to lay off federal employees during this government shutdown. So on this, generally speaking, do courts have the power to completely block the executive branch's layoffs?
Courts do have a power to some extent. We have seen that with another injunction earlier in the Trump administration, where the court instructed the Trump administration to hold off on some of the Doge firings. However, ultimately, as we've seen the Supreme Court do, the courts are deferential to the administration's perspective. So this is likely a temporary stay, and when this is appealed, we're likely to continue seeing the layoffs. At the end of the day, when these positions, when these jobs are not funded and there's no congressional appropriation, then there's no justification, no entitlement to these jobs, which is why President Trump is firing people instead of just suspending them.
But I want to ask you further here. Can a president use a shutdown to permanently remove parts of the government or programs without Congress?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, and I think we may very well end up seeing the Supreme Court weigh in on this. I think the way that President Trump is arguing or looking at the situation is if Congress does not actually appropriate money for a program, then that program cannot exist. And if the program or department cannot exist because there's no money for it, then it can't have employees. So I think this is the justification that Trump is using, and I think the courts may very well side with him on this.
Okay, Gerard, maybe I'll just ask you one more question here. Does executive power become stronger or stay the same during shutdowns?
Executive power stays the same in theory, but effectively it depends on which departments are operating into what capacity. We know, for example, that DHS, Homeland Security, and the Defense Department have been funded by a previous bill, so they continue operating pretty much as normal through the shutdown. But otherwise, everyone is feeling the pain of the shutdown, and not much work is getting done until these departments, these people are all funded to come back to work.
Well, all right, Gerard, always great to speak with you. Thank you for your time today.
My pleasure. Thank you.